Hatsi and welcome everyone. We would like to start this off by doing a land acknowledgement and then a blessing. We would like to acknowledge the people of this land, the Kumeyaay, the Luceño, the Kupa, and all the other indigenous people that have come here before. We would like to include everyone. We would like them to come back into balance with that feminine spirit within themselves. We ask that the nurturing, the caring, and the loving parts of ourselves, that we go forward to support each other in a good way. All the natural beings that are part of our world, we ask for forgiveness for the things that we have done, and then we ask that we all together go forward to bring about a healthier world. Our Mother Earth, she is our birthplace, and we shall return to her. Komi kokadi. I believe this to be true with my heart. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Celeste Barbier. I am an Oceanside resident, if you can't tell, and I have been a part of the Women's March ever since the first one in 2016, and then the last few years I've also been a part of the North County Women's March as one of your entertainer performers. I live here in Oceanside. I perform at numerous venues and events, weddings, all kinds of things. You can follow me at celestebarbier.com. You can also find my original music and covers on Spotify, iTunes, everywhere that you stream your music. And today I want to sing a song that is a really powerful song for us revolutionaries and radicals that we are. This is called What's Up by the Four Non-Blondes, totally from my era, growing up in the 80s and 90s. And it's because I am passionate about women's reproductive rights. I believe it is completely my body, my choice, and I believe it is your body and your choice of what to do with it. So here's a great song. I hope it empowers you and makes you feel strong today and going forward into your 2022.
Trying to get old and baby love for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should, this world is made up of this brotherhood of man, for whatever that means. And so it comes sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it all what's in my head, and I'm feeling a little peculiar. And so I wake up in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, hey, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, hey, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? Ooh, ooh, oh, and I'm trying, oh my God, I'm trying today in this institution, and I pray, oh my God, I pray every day for a destination.
Hello, North County, San Diego. It is Venus Johnson, and I am thrilled to be here for this year's 2022 North County, San Diego Women's March. This year, our focus is on reproductive justice. We have an incredible interview with SisterSong, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Here with me today is Woola Dawson of SisterSong. Woola Dawson is the first communications director and works to integrate and amplify SisterSong's activities with strategic communications while also supporting the team's training and membership coordinators. Woola learned about reproductive justice at an Atlanta-based abortion clinic, Feminist Women's Health Center. The framework deepened and expanded the analysis and organizing and provided language for her values and life focus today. Woola Dawson, thank you so much for being with us here today. I can't wait to get into this interview and for everyone to learn more about SisterSong, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. Woola, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great.
Awesome. As we get started, I want to just get into the history of SisterSong. I want everyone to know, how did SisterSong come about? What is it about? And how have you all expanded in the realm of reproductive justice?
Yes. So SisterSong's beginnings are connected to the beginnings of the reproductive justice framework, right? So 12 Black women came together at a conference and came up with the term reproductive justice. And one of the women there was Loretta Ross. And Loretta Ross was one of the first directors at SisterSong. And SisterSong was a collective of 4 mini communities that came about in 1997, based in Atlanta, Georgia, and Black-led, but representing African American, Asian American, Native American, and Pacific Islander communities across the country, including Latinx communities as well. So SisterSong is based on the reproductive justice framework, and the reproductive justice framework is based on 4 tenets connected to human rights. And so in the conference where those 12 Black women were, where they married together social justice and anti-racism and reproductive rights, they have this awareness that white women leading this work for reproductive health and reproductive rights at that time were single-mindedly focused on abortion. And they weren't doing anything about the sterilization of Black women. They weren't thinking about what folks needed to raise the children that they wanted to have, and what it meant to have communities that we could raise children that were thriving and no threats of police violence. And so SisterSong was launched to share the framework, to bring together organizations all across the country and different people of color communities, and advance the framework and expand the conversation away from just reproductive rights and abortion access.
Wonderful. And I totally agree. And as you've mentioned, reproductive justice speaks to the issues of human rights for all women identifying individuals. That's trans women, women of color, non-binary individuals, and various members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Having said, how can we all better elevate reproductive justice issues and realities? Because as you've mentioned, these are real realities for many individuals.
I mean, I would say reproductive justice is a reality for all individuals. I mean, we all want to live in communities where children can live freely. We want people to have access to the healthcare they need, and have the families that they want to grow. I think, it's a framework, right? So it's just about telling our own stories, our full stories, moving beyond stigma. Michelle Obama talking about using IVF as reproductive justice. Sex workers being protected and not criminalized in their work they're doing is reproductive justice. Not having toxic chemicals in our communities is reproductive justice. So a lot of our work that we're doing at SisterSong is just expanding the lens Because anything that you're doing to improve outcomes for families, anything that you're doing that's confronting white supremacy and anti-racism, anything that you're doing that's honoring someone's full life, their full expression of their gender, their full sexuality, the complicatedness of who they are, all of that is reproductive justice. You don't have to segment yourself or hold a part of yourself back. Just living your true identity and your full self is reproductive justice. So I will say that, we think of it as a way of life, and we're telling our stories. We're telling our aunties' stories and our grandma's stories. We've been centering the kind of families and the kind of communities that we want for a long time, and then this name, this conversation about reproductive justice started in the 1990s, and that's when SisterSong was founded. But long before then, we've been defining what we needed in our communities. We've been defying white supremacy. We've been holding on to our people and accepting all different kinds of gender expression, even if it didn't look exactly what it looked like in white communities, in our distinct people of color communities. We've been holding each other up, right? We've been taking care of each other.
Exactly. It's also to my knowledge that SisterSong provides quality training regarding this very topic. So when someone like me says, hey, I want to be more involved, how do I do so? How do I get into these trainings? How do you facilitate your trainings? Who are they for? What do they look like? What does a training look like for SisterSong?
Well, like I said, we're just expanding the lens. So a part of our training curriculum is just looking at the latest headlines of the day and using a reproductive justice framework at it. Looking at that lens, at what's happening in current events. We really have been expanding the conversation, right? We know that upper class, middle class, privileged white folks have always had access to the healthcare that they need and access to abortion. If abortion bans happen in one state or even in the country, folks can make their way across other states or across the world to get the care that they need if they have those resources, right? And so from the beginning, even when Roe, right, the anniversary this week, when Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973, it wasn't equal access for all of us, right? So we have been expanding the conversation and really reaching out to our counterparts in mainstream white feminist organizations doing abortion care, to expand the conversation, to open up the framework, to think about fertility services, to think about culturally respectful healthcare, culturally appropriate healthcare. So I will say primarily the audience of a lot of our trainings are healthcare providers, abortion clinic providers, but we also really like to think about the journey of training and reproductive justice being an ongoing process of applying this behavior to your framework. It's not taking a couple trainings and checking a box and you got it, right? It's about unlearning white supremacy. It's about dismantling how misogyny shows up and centering the most important voices in the conversation, which is a journey, right? It's not something that happens in a 3-hour training. So we do create opportunities for folks to continue to have the conversation. We host a reproductive justice conference every 2 years. This year, our conference will be based in Dallas. It will be a hybrid virtual and in-person conference in August, but we're continuing to offer opportunities to keep the narrative going because the training is just step one.
Wonderful, wonderful. And as you mentioned, to keep the narrative going, we have a history living in this country where men have the authority of controlling the narrative. So as women, we have to be in front of this narrative. What do you say we do to stay ahead of this narrative when it comes to reproductive justice? What is the continued work that SisterSong is doing to do so?
Well, honestly, I think that the most important part about expanding the conversation is just like something that you sent to me in your materials is and I also think the way that women's marches show up across the country and that movement that happened after Trump was elected is, what does it mean for folks who are newly politicized to get in line, right? To build upon the work that folks have already been doing, like recognize you might be new to the movement, but the movement is not new, right? So to build upon what other folks are doing, but also to just take down the barriers and make it accessible, right? To not always use language that's exclusive or highbrow, or maybe that people don't. I mean, a lot of people are talking about reproductive justice. You open up your TikTok right now, I promise you.
Everyone
What's
is
being recommended to you? People talking about their kids getting kicked out of school because they don't live in the district. That's reproductive justice. Our kids deserve great educations, right? So I will say that, yes, of course, there are places where men are dominating narratives. But at this point, we want to create a lot of space for trans men to be in the conversation. We want to make sure, I always think about everything like, could you talk to your grandma about this? Like, would she know, what is her entrance into this conversation? I do want to talk to my cousins and my little brother and the men in my life about this, and recognize that, you don't want the women that you care about and the people in your life who can give birth to not have access to the healthcare they need. You don't want them to have to worry about the police gunning them down, right? You don't want anyone in your family to be poisoned in your communities. Like, this isn't something that just affects women's bodies or people with uteruses. This is an expansive movement. We're opening it up.
Exactly. And as we've talked about during this interview, reproductive justice is truly a multifaceted issue. It's multiracial, multicultural, and more. So the intersectionality between reproductive justice and other prominent issues such as environmental issues, how do we marry the two when within our advocacy? What would be your suggestion on doing so?
I think it's just about seeing the connections and seeing what's happening in your local community and being willing to take the time to open up the conversations and find the common ground. Where we're based in Atlanta, Georgia, we have some serious issues about industries going into rural communities and poisoning those communities, and high rates of cancer in rural communities with Black folks and white folks. And we've done some coalition building here also in the state of Georgia, really talking about a living wage, right? So it's not a stretch to think about people who are raising families need living wages. So I think a lot of what we do in SisterSong is just working behind the scenes and working with the leaders of different movements. If it's the movement for Black lives, if it's efforts around raising the living wage, if it's thinking about abolishing the police. And, here in Georgia, we were involved in an effort to shut down a detention facility that was forcing sterilization on people without their knowledge. So we're out there modeling what the intersecting issues look like as reproductive justice. And I, challenge people to use the language of the framework of the tenets of reproductive justice and elevate that, because really, like I said, it all falls into reproductive justice, right? It all falls into making sure that our children can grow up in healthy communities, making sure we have access to culturally appropriate healthcare, making sure that people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks see people like them in all levels of leadership affecting our reproductive lives and our families.
Exactly. And as we know, rights are codified, but justice doesn't always follow, as we've mentioned before. When it comes to some of these issues regarding reproductive justice, sometimes it can be vulnerable, it can be sensitive, and it can be icky, it can be awkward. How does SisterSong ensure a safe space and a healthy space in these trainings and these conversations within their language? How do you facilitate some of that stuff that comes up, the terror or the trauma that regards reproductive justice?
Sure. I mean, One of the things about SisterSong's history is that we were intentional about being based in the South, right? And we're intentional about not being based in New York or DC or even in LA, right? And I do think that the culture of the South lends it to moving a little bit slower and just telling our full stories, right? And I think that there are really great traditions of holding up the pain and trauma of racism and the Jim Crow South, right? And the realities that we see just in our lives living in the South. This looks a little bit different than the rest of the country. And so I do think we have this great legacy that we're building upon, and vernacular of just living in this reality where you see the results of slavery and oppression is palpable in our lives here for those of us living in the South. But we also, we start our programming with centering activities. When we're doing in-person activities, sometimes we set aside a room for a safe space for folks to go into and breathe. I will say in our team, we have a birth justice team at SisterSong that works up specifically about transforming birth outcomes for Black families and helping out with teaching people midwifery tools, even if you don't have access to a doula or a midwife in your birthing process. So I do want to say that so much of our work is informed by powerful healers, the people in our communities who purpose is really here to heal us. And that's integral in what we do. Even spirituality shows up in the work that we do at SisterSong. We don't, like I said, we're not separating those parts of ourselves away from the work that we're doing.
Wonderful. I love that. And I really love the intentionality of SisterSong. A large part of this is not only in access to healthcare, but also the knowledge that there are organizations such as SisterSong. Having said, I am a strong believer that when you know better, you do better. So would you suggest any books or other resources that can serve to the education of reproductive justice?
Absolutely. So one of the founding mothers of the reproductive justice term, Loretta Ross, has written a great introduction book. So it's just Reproductive Justice, an introduction with Loretta Ross and Ricky Solinger. So that's a great starting place. And I will say, just in full transparency, I know some amazing reproductive justice scholars. I am not one of them. and I think that that's okay, right? We're not all going to be scholarly people. Some of us are going to learn, like I said, a lot about reproductive justice on TikTok. But I will just say, elevating Black stories, elevating stories of the people most marginalized, learning stories about trans people who are navigating fertility and giving birth and accessing reproductive health care. I think, some of us are going to go to fancy HBCUs and go and work at the White House. And some of us are going to be, and some of us are just going to be everyday people who have, 10 minutes to watch something entertaining. And that's going to open up and destigmatize some of these conversations. I think that's the biggest part, right? Talk to your aunties. Like, I think one thing in this wave of abortion bans that's been happening across the country, I literally tell people where I work, or I tell people that I myself have had an abortion. And, people who had an abortion in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s and the 80s, they tell me their stories. And so I think, a great education you can get is right in your own family, in your community, by signaling to people in your church, signaling to people in your community, I'm a safe person to talk to about abortion, about infertility, about people being crazy to your child at school, right? I'm going to be safe. I'm not going to gaslight you if you tell me your teacher's being racist to your child. I'm going to listen to you because I know that's a reality that a lot of parents are navigating.
Exactly. And I really love the part about elevating Black stories and realizing that a lot of these connections can be right in your backyard, right in your hometown, right in your household. And we don't even know it because a lot of the times we are just afraid of that stigma. We're afraid to reach out and start the conversation. A large part of the North County San Diego Women's March is elevating the voices that have been doing the work already. Oftentimes, members of our society who aren't necessarily politically involved or go to a fancy HBCU, as you've mentioned, they aren't that bold about advocacy or don't realize that is such a grassroots issue. And because this is an issue that yearns for agency and advocacy, what would be your suggestion or recommendation to those individuals watching who aren't necessarily too familiar on how to create that agency with reproductive justice?
Well, I will say, get familiar with how laws are made in the smallest level of government that you live in. If it's your county, if it's the school board, if it's the city. I do think I'm one of those people who I need to be explained the difference between the House and the Senate over and over again. But I got it, it took some time. It wasn't, I didn't listen closely in civics class. So I say, most of these things are learnable. Should you decide that that's the path that you want to go, it's not that hard. And I encourage you to get familiar with that. At the same time, it's also important to change hearts and minds, right? It's also important to be brave at church, even if it's just in Bible study, right? It doesn't have to be, on the pulpit challenging the preacher and the deacon board, but really opening up grassroots conversations to destigmatize these issues is powerful. And I wouldn't put that beneath organizing your neighbors to vote against a bill or showing up at your state legislature. All of those modes of changing the narrative, changing people's hearts, opening up the conversations, encouraging other people to tell their stories and be brave when it's safe, right? All of that is valuable.
Great. As we ask for donations and send part of our proceeds to SisterSong, we wanted to ask, what does that look like for SisterSong? What would you be doing with those valued donations?
Well, one thing I will say is that, SisterSong has been the holder of reproductive justice since the late 1990s. So, and under the leadership of our executive director, Monica Simpson, we've done an amazing job of garnering resources for this movement. So one new program that I'm really thrilled about that very few people know about is that we are actually in the process of re-granting some of our funding. So we're doing good. We've been able to partner with other organizations who don't understand on the ground what's happening as much as we do. So one thing that you can know is that we are in the process of making sure the resources go to the best leaders, artists, individuals, organizations who are making connections between Black liberation and reproductive rights and reproductive justice, and also right on the front lines of birth justice and changing outcomes for maternal mortality rates across the country and centering, beautiful, abundant, gorgeous, thriving births for Black families and Black people.
Great. And as you mentioned, having that responsibility to uphold reproductive justice since the 1960s is one heck of a responsibility. So we honor you and we see you and we thank you for letting us know and sharing all of the wonderful work that you all do. As we wrap up here, I have one more question, and I like to ask everyone this question as we wrap up. Is there any question that you wish you were asked today that you would choose to emphasize? What would that be? What would you want everyone, of course, a part of the North County San Diego Women's March community, to know about SisterSong that we haven't mentioned yet?
I will say that I would just re-emphasize and double down that we're unraveling decades of anti-Blackness and white supremacy in this work. So it's slow work, it's important work, it's fulfilling work, but it's not fast work. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So I encourage people to be patient, to have a really clear, bright vision of what reproductive liberation looks like for you and your family and your community and the people coming behind you and after you and the people that came before you. But to realize that it's a bold endeavor that we're on, this reproductive justice stuff.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Wula, thank you so much. And as you mentioned, this is a very bold endeavor. Reproductive justice as a whole is a very bold journey to go down. SisterSong, Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective. We are so thankful to have this interview with you. Thank you for being with us and expressing all of the great things that Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective SisterSong is doing. Thank you so much, Wula.
Thank you for having me, Venus.